All right, here to help us unpack Godongwana's rescheduled speech, we're joined by Mmusi Maimane of Build One South Africa. He's also with the appropriations, I beg your pardon, portfolio. Good to have you, Mr. Maimane, and thank you very much for your time. A new formulation of the government's revenue and expenditure plan due to be, others are saying, discussed tomorrow, with a possibility of lawmakers then presenting it 2 days later. Others are saying, well, that meeting is only going to happen on Wednesday and needing to be presented a few hours later. The ANC's Secretary General saying that we must all be worried about the budget because we are on uncharted territory, is the word, or uncharted waters is what he is saying. What's your feeling? Are we on uncharted waters, or is he being unnecessarily alarmist?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to fellow South Africans. We in many ways are in the best place to test the laws that we put in place for the processing of the budget. I think we must remind ourselves that the budget is merely a law, like any other law. It is processed in the same way. The minister does not deliver the law to Parliament, he delivers a proposal. After that, the people of South Africa have the right to make inputs to that. It is only Parliament that passes laws. Eventually, they get signed by the president, but Parliament has to do its job. So in essence, what would happen after Wednesday is that our committee will receive both the appropriations and the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. We will then process it. I will be in Limpopo speaking to South Africans about what they would like to see in the budget, whether they agree with any tax increases or whether they agree with any of the expenditure cuts that are needed. And then ultimately, it will return to Parliament sometime in April for the third being the adoption of the framework, and then ultimately in May, June, where it will be eventually voted in. Yeah. What is important, which is the things that I'll be looking at, is what are the initiatives that we put in place to fund growth? And that will require us cutting on some things, because at the end of the day, if we're only growing at 1%, we are not going there. And cutting is not always cutting people in terms of the civil service. It's just effectively making government much more efficient. Because at this point in time, as things stand, government is big, cumbersome, expensive, and sometimes does not achieve the outcomes. So we are testing the full limits of the law, or in essence, applying what our constitutional frame makes provision for.
We're told by experts, and you've got close-range view of this, and you might be able to assist, that there is a gaping hole that needs to be plugged at Treasury. And this is the issue that we are dealing with here. And others are saying the Treasury needs to raise 191 billion rands. Hence the conversation we are having about a possible VAT increase. What do we understand about this gaping hole that Treasury needs to fill?
Well, what has been a reality, along with low growths of below 1%, is that the last number of years have seen a budget deficit of 5% annually. So naturally, in a 2.1 trillion rand budget, if you're running a 5% deficit, all that simply means is, correctly so, your expenditure is exceeding your income. Your second great dilemma, and to make it easy for all South Africans, is that for every 1 rand that comes into the fiscus, 22 cents of it goes towards funding for debt, 30 cents of it goes to the cost of employees, and over 60 cents of it is what we call the social wage, which when you add up all of that, it exceeds 1 rand, which means you either have to borrow that money or increase taxes. The bottom line is this, is that actually more than the gaping hole which you will need to fill, the policy decision is this: either you increase VAT or you stop the social relief of distress grant and decrease the amount with which increases were scheduled for public servants. Those are the choices. And those two constituents, the recipients of SRD and public servants, are politically motivated. Therefore, that's why the government will prefer to increase taxes on citizens rather than confront what is a very difficult issue. I certainly sit on the side of the world that says you can redeploy the finances that would have been given to the SRD grant to some form of extended public works program or public works program focused on rail, so that citizens earn that. And ultimately, as they are earning it, we are creating productivity around the rail sector. But if we don't make those decisions, you cannot, in essence, be giving to all people everything they want. We simply are running out of money. And in essence, individually, South Africans are getting poorer as all of us are accruing a debt that future generations are going to keep paying for.
Others are saying when government has already, or treasury, shall we put it that way, cut back or pared back spending over the course of several years, which, if you look at it, has limited the ability to hire more teachers, the ability to hire more police, the ability to fix infrastructure, the ability to fix our hospitals. There's a lot that has been cut, and further cutting will definitely impact the delivery of services. And therefore, for many, that leaves us with, as you put it, either we pause the pension fund contribution of state workers, we increase borrowing, which many are saying don't go there, or indeed we hike tax, raise taxes, either a small VAT increase or raise other taxes.
Well, I think if you want to try and save billions, almost immediately, as I have indicated, we need to make a tough decision about the SRD grant. Already the Constitutional Court has made a ruling about its expansion. It is simply unaffordable. It was an intervention brought on during COVID, and we needed to recognize that at the end of COVID, we need to bring it to a halt. And I knew at the time it'd be a tough decision, but it's a decision we have to make. The second is there are many government agencies that sit out there, whether it's the MDDA and multiple ones that people do not know and do not really add any substantive benefit to South Africa, that needs to be cut. But I think the third, which is about making sure that the efficacy of the state is put on the table, were we to have cabinet, so the special appropriation of the GNU cabinet was a 600 million rands. Now, yes, 600 million rands isn't going to plug a big hole in a multi-billion rand debt. But what you could do is give that 600 million rands to an institution like SARS, who are already indicating the fact that they are under collecting in the quantums of billions relative to their capability because they simply are not sufficiently staffed, and there's money that they simply can't police because they are undercapacitated. So I would go there. The historical line that you used to say there's been cuts in expenditure has not been met with a compensatory efficacy in government. So when you look at some of the expenditure, you can see some of the wasteful expenditure. Municipalities, for argument's sake, who operate on an annual 52 billion rands wasteful and fruitless expenditure. There should be a case upon which, whilst we're looking at audit outcomes, we need to think hard about how do we in fact safeguard that money. Municipalities that are returning funds when service delivery is not working. And what we desperately need to do is, rather than just simply saying the idea of cutting is off the table, we should rather be interrogating each of the votes, vote 1 to 41, and ask ourselves the significant question: does this add value to the people of South Africa, or is it something that politicians themselves want for their own benefit?
What would be most desirable for you between a slight VAT increase, which is seemingly likely going to be what the debate is, Johnson is saying there's no agreement yet in place, and a possibility of borrowing?
Neither of those options are desirable. I don't think we should be increasing VAT. I think South Africa's bonds are already rated at junk, so any more borrowing will simply mean that 20 of the 22 cents I was speaking about earlier, you are going to increase that and making sure that you constrain other programs. What for me is foundational is that, in fact, we need to confront, as I've said earlier, the SRD grant. We need to confront other types of big government expenditure that are not adding value often to South African citizens, and the funding of SARS. So whilst I hear the argument that says people have cut from education, from healthcare, etc., in nominal terms, we've seen a marginal increase in some of the education budget, in some of the policing budget, and that work still needs to continue. But you wouldn't even need to touch that if you are willing to make the tough decision. So to me, I'm more saying the only wiggle room that exists is amongst expenditure, because I'm yet to see a nation that's been able to tax itself to prosperity. We have in fact have to think hard about even the rationalization of ministries. You've got 41 budget votes, you've got 41 ministers in cabinet, you've got multiple duplications. And I think now is the time to really, against limited resources, suppressed growth globally, low inflation. We have to resize the state and look at growth initiatives to fund for those so that we can see more people being employed in our country. Otherwise, we are going to make a temporary plan this year, whether it's increasing VAT, as some have said, you're going to increase it by 0.5% and then progressively over the next number of years, which means the poor are going to be worse off in the medium term if you're just keeping increasing taxes. It is not a workable solution. Let's stop pulling magic tricks and do the hard work now that right-sizes the state and focus on what is sustainable for this country.
The National Tax Agency says there is scope to bolster collection, but it says boost my budget first. I need an increase there so that I can be able to do that. Others are looking at that and saying, well, the Treasury needs money now. And maybe the SARS route might be a long route. What's your feeling?
No, certainly not. I think that SARS's collection records, we needed to gave us an opportunity where we can think about the current commissioner of SARS asking the legitimate question what their projections are for this year. Because if we really deal with the size of 57 billion rands, which is what a 2% VAT would hike, a halting of the SRT grant at 37 and a redeployment of that in somewhere or another, and ultimately the balance of that being saying, let's fund that to SARS. Yes, might mean some hard work in the next number of months, but I can assure you over the long term, it's the only sustainable solution for South Africa. So the immediacy of the need for money and you simply holding that gun against people's heads is not going to be the helpful solution, because you are not willing yourself to look yourself in the mirror and say, what are the things that we need to cut from the state itself? Confront some very hard truths, like, for example, the agreed increase in wage over the next 3 years of 5.5%. No South African is getting that as things stand. We are under serious pressure as individuals across the country. So my urgency is, let us rethink what we are doing, because if we just keep adjusting the current deck of cards as we have them, we're simply not going to play a winning game over the long run. So I would urge that we think it through. And then lastly, I do think there are many state-owned enterprises that are, for example, needing a sense upon which you can either introduce private enterprises to partner with them so that we don't have to face up to the multiple bailouts that have had to go to those agencies over a long period of time.
The other, I think I spoke to one of the Nedley constituencies saying, well, the other option that is a money spinner, at least, is the corporate tax, company tax, and Treasury seemingly reluctant to go that route. Others are saying, well, taxing the wealthy also is another route. But they're saying this might risk stifling investment and economic growth. What's your feeling?
No, it's very difficult to tax super wealthy people because, in essence, wealthy people figure out mechanisms upon which they can declare lower losses, have got facilities outside the country. And it's true often for corporate tax because as companies make declarations, their returns are less. Our pathway is to really focus on growth and create savings about that. If there was a point perhaps I'd be willing to concede and look at is the withholding of the contribution that the state has to have to the pension fund, because that might give us an opportunity for a slight holiday and give a cash relief. But increasing taxes, especially for the wealthy, is the most ineffective way of revenue collection simply because of the loopholes that exist. And ultimately, you want to shield the middle class because the middle class are the South Africans who are loyal taxpayers. They are regular in that they find it difficult to find loopholes. They are payers, you earn payers. But more than that, you have to shield them because often, like many Black South Africans, you get Black tax, which means they have to, through remittances, help families who are outside of that. So saying that you want to zero rate items is not always helpful for that class because that class needs to make other contributions. So I do certainly think that perhaps the pension contribution is one way, but I keep beating the same drum. Focus on growth and focus on efficiency.
Do you think politics might overtake this? I mean, we already heard the DA saying the ANC is threatening to pass the marginal VAT hike via support from the EFF, for example.
Well, I think the flaw of the GNU is that it lacks a plan that all South Africans, regardless of what their political persuasion or let alone where they sit, can contribute towards. So at this stage, for many citizens, it feels like it's an arm wrestle between political parties trying to assert political relevance and dominance within the GNU rather than being practicable and pragmatic about what needs to happen in this country. So for me, in this instance, it is again a natural appeal. You know, politics can result in politricks, but money does not lie. Money actually gives us the rands and cents and the figures we need to go with. And therefore, ultimately, you cannot sacrifice the future of this country at the altar of politics. And I think in this instance, what the GNU will have to benefit from is actually President Ramaphosa's leadership. He needs to now make some strong decisions about where the thing goes, because ultimately it's not about safeguarding the GNU. It is about making sure that South Africa is investable, because a budget blow-up, an economic recession, and ultimately a cutting back on frontline services that are social waste driven, i.e. policing, etc., could have catastrophic consequences for this country and on a global stage. So we cannot afford to do that. We need to act decisively, and President Ramaphosa needs to take a strong lead in this regard.
Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on this afternoon. The Newsfeed PM continues shortly. Stay with us.